Weekend Breakfast with Penny Smith on talkRADIO.
What do we know about Madagascar? Well, first it helps if I actually say it properly. But Madagascar, I think for a lot of people, it's, so much of what Madagascar has come to mean to us is from wildlife programmes and also, of course, from cartoons, where, as we know, evil penguins go and colonise the place. Nevertheless, there are real problems there. It's a massive island off the east coast of Africa, and there are serious issues there. There's a double whammy. There is drought, and also there is COVID. Lisa Bass is the Director of Programmes and Operations at a charity called SEED Madagascar. Joins us now. Lisa, good morning to you. Just describe, for those who genuinely have only got an idea of Madagascar from those the cartoons, the animated films, describe Madagascar under normal circumstances.
Thanks, and good morning, Penny. Madagascar is an absolutely amazing country. I think if you watch the David Attenborough films and documentaries, the forests, the oceans, the amazing wildlife there is very much like Madagascar is. Unfortunately, it's only in pockets, and what isn't really in the international news or press is just how very poor Madagascar is. It's one of the poorest nations in the world, and that's often missed by, the emphasis on just how unique Madagascar's wildlife is. So, I live down in the south coast of Madagascar in an absolutely beautiful town. It's surrounded by oceans on three sides. I have access to forests, mountains. It's absolutely idyllic, but the people who live in the town have a far from idyllic living at times, with some of the challenges that they face.
Because that's the thing, isn't it? I think there's an impression with Madagascar, you think of it as being an island, so therefore you think, well, why can't people go fishing, for example? The point is, this is an enormous island, isn't it? It's enormous.
It is, and I think because we're, often dwarfed by the size of mainland Africa, people fail to realise just how big it is. And Madagascar is 2.5 times the size of the whole of the UK, whereas, Mauritius, just over the water, people think we're very much the size of Mauritius, but it is an absolutely huge island. There's very little infrastructure. From the town where I live up to the capital, right in the middle of the island, it takes, maybe sort of 2 to 3 days on the roads. They're just so very, very impassable that it's very difficult to also get around. So you've got this massive island with very little infrastructure for movement within it.
And also, of course, we know that drought conditions, there have been a number of droughts, haven't there? There just hasn't been enough rain in recent times. And that, of course, is combining with COVID to make it a very difficult situation. Tell us about what's happening.
Yeah, just as you say, Madagascar, and particularly the south where I live, has been really affected by climate change. We've seen the average temperatures increase. We've seen the rainfall patterns really changing so that we have concentrated rain between December and March, and that leaves the rest of the year with very, very little rain at all. So, when we're planting seeds, when we're harvesting, when we need rain, there just simply isn't any. And as well, we are affected by a lot of droughts. So over the past 20 years, we've had a threefold increase in sort of extreme weather, whether that's from the cyclones all the way to the droughts. But certainly the last 3 years in the south of Madagascar, it's been experiencing some really tough times. And we've had sort of 3 years of consecutive droughts, and that's had real impacts, not on sort of the harvests, but also on the seeds for the next year. And year on year, this has made it really, really difficult for people to bounce back.
Morning, Lisa. It's Rhea here. I wonder how much of a part tourism plays in the economy of the country.
In some parts of the country, particularly in the north, it plays a huge part in the economy. We've got a small island called Nosy Bay off the very north of Madagascar, which is basically the economy is tourism. Down in the south, it not so much. Again, because of the access, it's very, very difficult for tourists to get there. So really we see, the really intrepid explorers, the people who really want to come and see Madagascar as it kind of really is in its raw. So we do have tourists down there, but it's not so much part of the economy. And I think in a lot of ways that's a real shame, because tourism can bring so much to a country and so much to the communities. Particularly if ecotourism is done very well, we can work with forests, we can preserve the species, we can work with mangoes. It brings opportunities for people not only to rely on the land or the oceans, but they can make livings as well elsewhere. They guides and set up in their own businesses, drivers. It brings a lot of other livelihoods into somewhere that maybe traditionally has been just farming. So I think ecotourism could play a much, much bigger role in the country, but some parts of the country are very, very inaccessible.
But presumably the parts of the country that do currently see or had previously seen tourism have been pretty badly affected by the pandemic.
Completely, absolutely. We've got places, as I say, in Nosy Bay, which, the hotels have been closed. Madagascar reopened its borders for a few weeks in October and has now closed them again. There really isn't any other alternative but tourism up there. So the population finding it really, really difficult. But even in those far-flung places, down in the deep south, we did have a few eco-lodges. Well, one of the places where our research camp is based had a very small eco-lodge there. And they had a huge impact on the community. The community maybe is only 2,000 people, most of them subsistence fishers or sort of farmers. But the eco-lodge gave them employment. The tourists that came would pay the forest fees, which allowed people then to patrol the forest and get income from there. They sold local products, so, not only fish, but particularly as well for some of the women's livelihoods, like, the reed weaving. The hotel would buy their mats and the tourists would buy their baskets. And they worked a lot with us as well on conservation. We have a bat roost very near to the eco-lodge, where the tourists that would come would again pay fees, and that allowed us to work with the community, set up a bat patrol, and we protected the roost that was near the forest.
The problem at the moment, of course, is now, as I said, with these terrible droughts, people have turned to, and people can't even get the staple food in this particularly arid region, which is usually cactus fruit. So the problem is now that many hundreds of thousands of people are in the southern Madagascar in the grip of a hunger emergency. Essentially, they're eating clay, they're eating the lemurs, and they're sort of selling firewood and charcoal, even though they know it's not sensible for the environment. And of course, no, it's not as though they're not aware of lemurs either, being the sort of animals that we've been watching, and only in Madagascar. But the point is, if you are starving, that is what you do. Absolutely. And, if your children are starving, that is what you do. That's what we would all do for our families. And I think, the reports that are now coming out of people eating clay, they're certainly backed up by, the SEED staff who are in the field. I was speaking to a couple of people who had just come back from the field on Friday, and one of them was reporting, going into the mangroves, going into the rivers, digging up roots and drying them for 4 or 5 days before they could eat them. We in the mountains, they're now using a very poisonous plant, but if you literally soak it for 7 days and cook it, you can eat it. It's very bitter, it's very horrible, but ultimately it staves off hunger.
Exactly.
Now, the question, of course, is how can we help?
I think, certainly there's lots of programs that are doing food aid. We ourselves, although we're not a relief agency, the communities that we've worked with for 20 years are in such dire straits. that we've actually just launched our own appeal for food relief, and we're hoping to start that in the first week of January. Particularly we're going to be targeting mothers with children under 5 and pregnant women, because traditionally we've worked in the health centres. So by talking to people from the health centres, the doctors, the nurses, particularly the midwives, they're seeing such an increase in people, walking miles and miles into these very, very rural community health clinics with malnutrition. So we're going to be working with the health clinics, particularly giving basic food relief to mothers and pregnant women.
So people can go on and find out about it on various platforms. Lisa, thank you so much for talking to us this morning and bringing us up to date with what is going on in Madagascar. That's Lisa Barker, who's the Director of Programmes and Operations at SEED Madagascar.